This beach in Hawaii has naturally green sand, and even standing directly in front of it, the color still feels wrong. Not painted. Not edited. Not enhanced with filters or artificial lighting. Real green sand stretching across the shoreline beside deep blue Pacific waves and black volcanic cliffs. And the moment most people see it for the first time, they stop walking completely. Because the brain immediately tries correcting what the eyes are seeing. Beaches are not supposed to look like this. The place is called Papakōlea Beach, located near the southern tip of the Big Island. And what makes the location feel so impossible is not just the green sand itself, it's the environment surrounding it. Rugged volcanic cliffs. Violent ocean waves crashing against lava rock. Powerful winds moving across barren coastline. And hidden inside that harsh landscape sits one of the rarest beaches on Earth. A place so visually strange it almost feels like Earth made something it was never supposed to create. And maybe that's why people who arrive there often become unusually quiet for the first few moments. Because the beach doesn't feel artificial. It feels impossible. The first thing people notice about Papakōlea Beach is how emotionally overwhelming it feels in person. Photos already look surreal online, but standing there creates a completely different reaction. Some visitors stop mid-walk the moment they finally see the shoreline. Others stare silently at the sand as if their eyes still haven't adjusted correctly. And maybe that's because the human brain keeps trying to correct the color automatically. Beaches are supposed to have white sand. Or black volcanic sand. Maybe golden sand. But green sand creates immediate visual contradiction because it feels wrong even while clearly being real. And this is where the beach starts becoming emotionally addictive. The sand itself doesn't glow bright neon green the way some people expect. Instead, it carries an olive green shimmer beneath sunlight that constantly shifts depending on weather, cloud cover, and the angle of the sun. In some moments the beach looks subtly green. In others, the shoreline suddenly appears almost unreal against the deep blue Pacific Ocean surrounding it. The contrast feels visually impossible. And maybe that's because humans are deeply affected by landscapes that challenge what the brain expects Earth to look like. The environment surrounding Papakōlea only amplifies that reaction. The beach sits isolated beneath volcanic cliffs shaped by eruptions and erosion over thousands of years. There are no luxury hotels surrounding the coastline. No polished tourist skyline. No massive crowds. Reaching the beach requires crossing rugged terrain where the environment starts feeling increasingly raw and untouched. Wind moves aggressively across the cliffs. Ocean waves crash violently against lava rock formations below. And the farther people move toward the shoreline, the more the landscape begins feeling ancient rather than modern. Which may explain why arriving there feels less like visiting a beach, and more like discovering a place hidden quietly outside ordinary reality. And this is where the beach stops looking beautiful, and starts looking physically impossible. Because the green sand exists due to a volcanic mineral called olivine, a crystal formed deep inside Earth's mantle under extreme heat and pressure. During ancient volcanic eruptions, massive amounts of olivine became trapped inside lava near the coastline. Over thousands of years, the surrounding volcanic material slowly eroded away while the heavier green crystals remained behind, gradually collecting along the beach itself. And what makes that process extraordinary is how unbelievably specific the conditions must be for it to happen successfully. The eruption must contain large concentrations of olivine. The coastline must erode in exactly the right way. Ocean movement must separate the heavier crystals from surrounding material over enormous periods of time. Which means Papakōlea Beach exists because multiple geological conditions aligned almost perfectly across thousands of years. And this is where the brain briefly stops processing the place normally. Because people suddenly realize they are not simply looking at a rare beach. They are looking at something Earth almost never creates. Only a handful of green sand beaches exist worldwide. And maybe that's because landscapes like this require nature to behave with almost impossible precision over enormous periods of time. The volcanic cliffs, violent ocean currents, isolation, and raw terrain create the sensation of standing inside a place that feels unfinished by civilization. And maybe that's why Papakōlea feels emotionally surreal rather than simply beautiful. Because the environment itself creates the sensation of looking at something Earth was never really supposed to make. And this is where the experience becomes much more intense than most people expect. Because reaching Papakōlea Beach is not easy. The area sits far from Hawaii's major resort zones, and visitors must cross rugged coastal terrain exposed to heat, wind, and harsh environmental conditions before finally reaching the shoreline itself. And once people begin moving through the landscape, the emotional atmosphere changes quickly. The coastline starts feeling isolated in ways difficult to experience elsewhere in Hawaii. Massive cliffs rise above sections of the trail. Ocean waves crash violently against black volcanic rock below. Strong winds move constantly across the open terrain. And because the surrounding environment contains very little development, the area begins feeling strangely disconnected from modern life. This is where the beach stops feeling like a tourist destination. It starts feeling discovered. Almost hidden. And maybe that isolation is part of what makes the experience emotionally powerful. Because humans instinctively react differently to environments that feel untouched by civilization. The farther people move toward Papakōlea, the more the landscape begins resembling another planet rather than a tropical paradise. Black lava rock. Harsh sunlight. Violent ocean movement. Rugged cliffs stretching endlessly toward the horizon. And then suddenly, green sand appears beneath the volcanic walls like something physically impossible hidden inside the coastline itself. And for a moment, people just stop moving. Because the contrast becomes emotionally overwhelming. The surrounding landscape feels harsh enough that the existence of something so visually strange inside it almost stops making sense entirely. What makes Papakōlea Beach especially powerful is that the place affects people emotionally before they even understand the science behind it. Most visitors already know the sand is green before arriving. But the brain still struggles processing the contradiction once standing there physically. Because the beach creates a rare emotional experience modern people almost never encounter anymore, the feeling of seeing something on Earth that genuinely does not look real. And maybe that's why the location spreads so aggressively online once people discover it. Not because it feels artificially beautiful, but because it feels naturally impossible. The green sand constantly shifts beneath changing sunlight. The surrounding volcanic cliffs create overwhelming scale around the shoreline itself. Ocean waves crash violently enough that the coastline feels alive. And because the environment remains relatively isolated compared to Hawaii's resort areas, the beach still carries emotional rawness difficult to preserve in famous destinations. Visitors arrive expecting beauty, and leave talking about disbelief. Some laugh quietly once they realize the color is actually real. Others become unusually silent while staring at the shoreline. And maybe that's because Papakōlea creates something modern life rarely does anymore, emotional wonder powerful enough to temporarily interrupt ordinary thought. The realization that nature is still capable of creating places so unusual they emotionally overwhelm modern expectations entirely. And this is where the beach stops feeling like scenery. It starts feeling impossible. So why does Papakōlea Beach feel so unforgettable? One explanation is simple: the green sand is visually rare enough that the brain instinctively reacts with surprise once seeing it in person. But that explanation alone doesn't fully explain why so many people leave describing the place emotionally rather than visually. Because Papakōlea feels bigger than just unusual sand. It feels like standing inside one of Earth's geological accidents, a place created through volcanic violence, erosion, time, and environmental conditions aligning almost perfectly over thousands of years. And maybe that's why the beach affects people so deeply once they finally reach it. Because landscapes like this remind people that nature is still capable of creating things beyond ordinary human expectation. Not fantasy. Not mythology. Real places existing quietly on Earth that still feel impossible even while standing directly inside them. And maybe that's why Papakōlea Beach spreads so powerfully once people discover it online. Because somewhere deep down, humans are still searching for places that make the world feel mysterious again. And maybe that's why people leave Papakōlea Beach feeling like they briefly stepped into a version of Earth that was never supposed to exist at all. Some places become famous because they're beautiful. And some places become unforgettable because they shouldn't exist at all. On Tilt and Chill, we explore places that make the world feel mysterious again. Real locations where beauty, atmosphere, history, wonder, and human emotion still collide in ways difficult to fully explain. And if this made you question how many impossible places still exist quietly on Earth, you're exactly where you should be. Join us next time. Tilt and chill. Stay curious.